I need to tell you something that might completely change how you see yourself and explain why you've been struggling in ways that never made sense before. 3 months ago, I discovered something about my own personality that made everything click into place. For 32 years, I'd been trying to force myself into a mold that was fundamentally wrong for who I am, and it was slowly killing my spirit. You see, I'm naturally what Carl Jung would call an introverted, intuitive type. But I'd spent my entire career trying to be an extroverted sensing type, because that's what I thought success looked like. I was forcing myself into networking events that drained me, focusing on practical details that bored me to tears, and wondering why I felt like I was living someone else's life. Then I discovered Jung's psychological types, and everything made sense. Carl Jung, the brilliant Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of human personality, spent decades identifying 4 fundamental psychological functions that shape how we experience reality. What he discovered should terrify and liberate you at the same time, because there's a very good chance you've been living according to the wrong type your entire life. Here's what's truly shocking about Jung's discovery. He found that each person is born with a natural psychological type, a fundamental way of processing information and making decisions that feels as natural as breathing. But here's the problem that's probably ruining your life right now. Most people never discover their true type because society, family, and culture pressure us to develop in ways that might be completely opposite to our nature. Jung documented case after case of people who spent decades living according to the wrong psychological type, only to experience what he called a neurosis of the unlived life. These weren't people with mental illness in the traditional sense. These were individuals who had simply been trying to be someone they fundamentally were not, and their psyche was rebelling against this betrayal of their authentic nature. Today, I'm going to reveal Jung's 4 psychological types, help you identify which one represents your true nature, and show you why understanding this could be the key to finally living the life you're actually meant to live. Because once you understand your authentic psychological type, everything changes. Your career choices, your relationships, your daily habits, even your deepest sources of fulfillment suddenly make sense in a way they never have before. But first, let me explain why this matters more than you realize. Jung discovered that when people live according to their true psychological type, they experience what he called psychological flow. Decisions become easier, energy levels increase, and life starts feeling natural instead of forced. But when people live against their type, they experience chronic fatigue, persistent dissatisfaction, and a nagging sense that they're somehow living the wrong life. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives never discovering their true type, simply because they've never been taught that different types of people are fundamentally designed to experience reality in completely different ways. They assume everyone thinks like they think, processes information like they process information, and finds energy in the same places they find energy. This assumption is destroying millions of lives, not understanding Jung's revolutionary discovery. We dive into the 4 types. You need to understand how revolutionary Jung's discovery actually was. Before Jung, psychology largely assumed that healthy people should all function in roughly similar ways. Jung shattered this assumption by proving that normal, healthy people can have fundamentally different ways of perceiving reality and making decisions, and that these differences are not flaws to be corrected, but natural variations to be understood and honored. Jung identified 2 fundamental ways that psychological energy moves. He called these attitude types. The first is extraversion, where psychological energy naturally flows outward toward the external world of people, places, and activities. The second is introversion, where psychological energy naturally flows inward toward the internal world of thoughts, feelings, and reflections. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly profound. He discovered that within each attitude type, there are two fundamental psychological functions that determine how people prefer to gather information and make decisions. He called these the function types. The first function type is what Jung called thinking. People with a dominant thinking function make decisions based on logical analysis, objective criteria, and systematic reasoning. They naturally ask, what makes logical sense? When faced with choices, the second function type is feeling. People with a dominant feeling function make decisions based on personal values, the impact on relationships, and what feels right according to their inner value system. They naturally ask, what aligns with my values and honors the people involved? When making choices. Now here's where this gets really interesting, and where most people discover they've been living incorrectly. Jung found that each person has one dominant function that feels most natural and energizing, and one inferior function that feels difficult and draining. The problem is that society often rewards the development of functions that might be completely unnatural for your type. For example, if you're naturally a feeling type, but you've been told your whole life that emotions are weakness, and you should always be logical and objective, you've probably been forcing yourself to operate from your inferior thinking function. This creates what Jung called psychological exhaustion, because you're constantly working against your nature. Conversely, if you're naturally a thinking type, but you've been told that you're too cold and analytical, and you need to be more emotionally sensitive, you might be forcing yourself to operate from your inferior feeling function, which will feel awkward and draining. The four primary psychological types. Now let me reveal Jung's four fundamental psychological types and help you identify which one represents your authentic nature. Pay attention to which description creates a sense of recognition or relief, because that's often your psyche recognizing its true home. The first type Jung identified is the extraverted thinking type. If this is your natural type, you're energized by organizing the external world according to logical principles. You love creating systems, solving practical problems, and making decisions based on objective analysis. You naturally see inefficiencies and want to fix them. You're comfortable with authority and often end up in leadership positions because you can see what needs to be done and figure out logical ways to accomplish it. Here's the key insight about this type that most people miss. Extraverted thinking. Types are not trying to be cold or uncaring when they focus on logic and efficiency. This is simply how their mind naturally works. They process information by asking, what's the most logical and efficient way to handle this situation? They show care by creating order and solving problems. If you're an extraverted thinking type who's been told you're too rigid or need to be more emotional, you've probably been exhausting yourself trying to operate from your inferior feeling function. The solution isn't to become less logical. The solution is to understand that your logical approach is a gift that needs to be expressed in environments that value systematic thinking and practical problem solving. The second type is the extraverted feeling type. If this is your natural type, you're energized by creating harmony in relationships and helping others feel valued and understood. You naturally pick up on emotional undercurrents and want to address them. You make decisions by considering how your choices will affect other people and whether they align with your personal values about what's right and good. Extraverted feeling types often become the emotional caretakers in their families and workplaces, not because they're codependent, but because they genuinely gain energy from creating emotional harmony and helping others feel supported. Their feeling function isn't emotionalism or irrationality. It's a sophisticated way of processing information that takes into account the human factors that pure logic might miss. If you're an extraverted feeling type, who's been told you're too sensitive or emotional, you've probably been forcing yourself to ignore your natural ability to read emotional situations and make decisions based on pure logic instead. This creates internal conflict because you're designed to factor in human impact when making choices. The third type Jung identified is the introverted thinking type. If this is your authentic nature, you're energized by understanding how things work at a deep theoretical level. You love analyzing complex ideas, finding underlying principles, and developing comprehensive understanding of subjects that fascinate you. You prefer to think things through thoroughly before speaking or acting. Introverted thinking types are often the researchers, theorists, and deep specialists in their fields. They're not antisocial when they prefer to work alone. They're simply designed to do their best thinking in quiet environments where they can follow their thoughts to their logical conclusions without external interruption. If you're an introverted thinking type who's been pressured to be more socially outgoing or to make quick decisions without thorough analysis, you've probably been operating against your nature in ways that feel exhausting and superficial. Fourth type is the introverted feeling type. If this represents your true nature, you're energized by exploring your inner world of values, emotions, and personal meaning. You have a rich inner life and strong convictions about what's right and wrong, though you might not express these convictions publicly unless something really important is at stake. Introverted feeling types often appear quiet or reserved on the surface, but they have deep wells of passion for causes and people they care about. They're not indecisive when they take time to process their feelings about a situation. They're accessing a sophisticated internal guidance system that helps them make authentic choices. If you're an introverted feeling type who's been told you need to be more assertive or logical, you've probably been forcing yourself to ignore your natural wisdom about what feels right and authentic. The catastrophic cost of living the wrong type. Now that you understand the four types, let me explain why living according to the wrong type is so damaging and why so many people end up in this situation. Jung discovered that psychological type is largely innate. You're born with natural preferences for how you prefer to direct your energy and make decisions. But from early childhood, family dynamics, cultural expectations, and educational systems often reward certain types while discouraging others. For example, our culture tends to reward extraverted thinking types in business settings. This means that people of other types often feel pressure to develop their thinking function and become more extraverted in order to succeed professionally. But here's what Jung found happens when people try to live primarily from their inferior functions. First, you experience chronic fatigue because you're constantly working against your natural grain. Imagine if you were left-handed, but forced to write with your right hand for your entire life. You could develop some skill with your right hand, but it would always feel awkward and require more energy than using your dominant hand. That's what happens when you live from your inferior psychological functions. Second, you develop what Jung called psychological symptoms that seem to have no clear cause. These might include chronic anxiety, depression, irritability, or a persistent sense that your life doesn't feel like your own. These symptoms often emerge because your psyche is trying to get your attention and redirect you toward your authentic nature. Third, you make life choices that look good on paper but feel empty or wrong. You might choose careers that provide security but bore you to tears. You might enter relationships that seem logical but don't nourish your soul. You might live in ways that other people approve of, but that slowly drain your life force. Jung documented numerous cases of people who spent decades building lives according to their inferior functions, only to experience what he called the crisis of the unlived life, usually around midlife. These individuals had achieved external success according to society's standards, but they felt internally dead because they had never learned to live from their authentic psychological nature. The most tragic part is that many people blame themselves for these feelings. They think they're ungrateful, weak, or somehow flawed because they can't find satisfaction in lives that should theoretically make them happy. They don't realize that they're experiencing the natural consequences of living against their psychological type. Identifying your authentic types. Oh, how do you identify your true psychological type? Especially if you've been conditioned to develop functions that aren't natural for you. Jung developed several methods for distinguishing between your authentic preferences and your learned adaptations. First, pay attention to what energizes versus drains you. Your dominant functions will feel energizing even when they're challenging. Your inferior functions will feel draining even when you're successful at using them. For example, if you're naturally an introverted feeling type, but you've learned to be analytical and logical, you might be good at logical analysis, but it will leave you feeling empty rather than fulfilled. Second, notice what you're drawn to when you have complete freedom of choice. When you have a free weekend with no obligations, what do you naturally want to do? When you're in a bookstore or browsing online content, what topics consistently capture your interest? These preferences often point toward your authentic type. Third, consider what you were like as a child before you learned to adapt to others' expectations. Children often express their natural type more freely because they haven't yet learned to suppress their authentic preferences. If you were naturally drawn to solitary activities like reading or building things, you might be an introverted type. If you were naturally drawn to organizing group activities or taking care of others' feelings, you might be an extraverted type. Fourth, pay attention to what kind of praise feels meaningful versus empty to you. If you're an introverted thinking type, being praised for your deep insights and thorough analysis will feel nourishing. Being praised for your social skills might feel nice, but somehow beside the point. If you're an extraverted feeling type, being acknowledged for your ability to bring people together and create harmony will feel deeply satisfying. Being praised for your logical analysis might feel hollow. Jung also suggested paying attention to your natural problem-solving approach. When you face a challenging situation, what's your instinctive first step? Thinking types naturally want to analyze the situation logically and develop a systematic plan. Feeling types naturally want to consider how the situation affects everyone involved and find solutions that honor important relationships and values. The liberation of living. Your true type ones who identify and begin living according to your authentic psychological type. Jung found that people experience what can only be described as psychological liberation. Suddenly, choices that were once agonizing become clear. Work that once felt like drudgery becomes engaging. Relationships that were once draining become nourishing. Let me share what happened when I finally understood that I'm an introverted intuitive type and stopped trying to be an extraverted sensing type. I left the sales job that was slowly crushing my soul and started work that allowed me to focus on ideas and possibilities rather than immediate practical details. I stopped forcing myself to attend networking events that trained me and started finding ways to connect with people through shared ideas and interests. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Within 6 months, I had more energy than I'd had in years. Within a year, I'd found work that actually excited me instead of just paying the bills. Within 2 years, I developed relationships that nourished rather than exhausted me. This isn't about making excuses for your weaknesses or avoiding growth. It's about understanding the difference between developing your natural strengths versus forcing yourself to be someone you're fundamentally not. When you live according to your authentic type, you naturally want to grow and develop because growth feels like expansion rather than self-betrayal. For example, an introverted thinking type who understands their nature might choose to develop. Better communication skills so they can share their insights more effectively. But they wouldn't try to become an extraverted feeling type who gains energy from constant social interaction. They'd find ways to communicate that honor their need for depth and reflection. An extraverted feeling type might develop their analytical skills to make better decisions that serve the people they care about. But they wouldn't try to become a thinking type who makes decisions based purely on logical criteria without considering human impact. Practical steps for aligning with your type. If you've recognized your authentic type and realized you've been living according to patterns that don't serve your nature, here's how to begin the transition toward psychological authenticity. This process takes time and patience because you're essentially rewiring patterns that might have been in place for decades. Start by making small daily choices that honor your type. If you're an introverted type, give yourself permission to decline social invitations when you need quiet time to recharge. If you're an extroverted type, actively seek out social interaction instead of forcing yourself to be content with isolation. If you're a thinking type, start making decisions by first asking yourself what makes logical sense before considering other factors. If you're a feeling type, start making decisions by first asking yourself what aligns with your values and honors the people involved. Begin restructuring your environment to support your type. Introverted types often need quiet spaces for thinking and reflection. Extraverted types often need variety and stimulation in their environment. Thinking types often need organized, efficient spaces that support logical work. Feeling types often need warm, personally meaningful spaces that reflect their values and relationships. Consider how your career choices align with your type. This doesn't mean you have to quit your job immediately, but start thinking about how you might modify your current role or transition toward work that better suits your psychological nature. Extraverted thinking types often thrive in management or systems roles. Extraverted feeling types often excel in teaching, e-teaching, or human resources. Introverted thinking types often flourish in research, analysis, or specialized technical roles. Introverted feeling types often find fulfillment in creative work, counseling, or mission-driven organizations. Pay attention to your relationships and how they align with your type. This doesn't mean ending relationships with people of different types, but it does mean understanding what each relationship gives and takes from you, and ensuring you have relationships that truly nourish your psychological nature. Most importantly, start giving yourself permission to be who you actually are, instead of who you think you should be. This might be the most challenging part, because it often involves disappointing people who have become accustomed to your adapted self rather than your authentic self. The ripple effects of psychological authenticity when you begin living according to your true psychological type. The effects extend far beyond your personal satisfaction. Jung observed that people living authentically from their type contribute more effectively to society because they're operating from their natural strengths rather than forcing themselves to compensate for perceived weaknesses. Think about it this way: when an introverted thinking type stops trying to be socially extraverted and focuses on developing their natural analytical abilities, they become valuable contributors to any organization that needs deep thinking and systematic problem solving. When an extraverted feeling type stops trying to be coldly logical and focuses on their natural ability to understand and harmonize human dynamics, they become invaluable in roles that require emotional intelligence and relationship building. The world needs all four types operating at their best. We need extraverted thinking types to create efficient systems and solve practical problems. We need extraverted feeling types to build bridges between people and create harmonious communities. We need introverted thinking types to develop deep understanding and innovative solutions. We need introverted feeling types to maintain authentic values and provide compassionate guidance. When people live according to their inferior types, they contribute far less effectively because they're operating from weakness rather than strength. But when people discover and develop their natural type, they become powerful contributors to the collective human effort. Jung believed that psychological type diversity is essential for human survival and growth. Each type sees aspects of reality that the other types might miss. Thinking types see logical patterns and efficient solutions. Feeling types see human needs and value-based considerations. Extraverted types see opportunities in the external world. Introverted types see possibilities in the internal world of ideas and reflection. Your journey towards psychological authenticity. As we conclude this exploration of Jung's psychological types, I want you to consider the possibility that everything you've been struggling with in your life might have a simple explanation. You might not be flawed, weak, or broken. You might simply be living according to the wrong psychological type. The persistent fatigue, the sense that your life doesn't fit, the relationships that drain rather than energize you, the career choices that look good on paper but feel empty inside. All of these might be symptoms of living against your authentic psychological nature. Jung spent his entire career helping people discover and live according to their true type because he understood that psychological authenticity is the foundation of mental health, life satisfaction, and meaningful contribution to the world. When you live from your authentic type, you stop fighting against yourself and start working with the psychological strengths you are born to develop. Tonight, before you go to sleep, ask yourself this question. If you could live completely according to your natural preferences without worrying about others' expectations or society's demands, what would your life look like? What kind of work would energize rather than drain you? What kind of relationships would nourish rather than exhaust you? What kind of daily routine would feel natural rather than forced? Your answers to these questions might reveal the psychological type you are meant to live from all along. And once you understand your authentic type, you can begin the journey toward the life you are actually designed to live instead of the life you've been trying to force yourself to live. Remember, Jung's psychological types aren't limitations or excuses. They're liberation tools that help you understand how to work with your nature rather than against it. When you finally align with your authentic psychological type, you don't become less than you could be. You become exactly who you were meant to be, operating from your natural strengths and contributing your unique gifts to the world that the life you've been longing for might not require you to become someone different. It might simply require you to become more authentically yourself.